All right, so we're back. Now it's time to get into the nitty-gritty of what Photoshop is and what it do. Okay, so let's do a file new. So I'm going to hit Control N, right? And or I can do File New. Okay, Control N, and let's talk about canvas sizes for a moment. Now, when you're using paper, you know, US paper, you've got an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper at 300 dpi. Now, the width and the height have to do with inches because that's what we're accustomed to as you know, Western American mindset individuals, and the resolution has to do with the print ability. Resolution is typically for print, not for display. It's a deception. That's what this is for. Although it does affect resolution. Okay, when I like at the minimum, do not use anything below 72 dpi. So the way that we design textures, all right, so this video is actually catered to both Photoshop 101 for 2D students, but it's also catered to Photoshop 101 for 3D students who've already had some Photoshop. This is a good review lesson for you too. Okay, so in dealing with textures, dealing with display on what your engine will use in regards to like Unreal and Unity, you want to use at a minimum, you can use like an 8x8 pixel. So you do 8x8 and then switch this over to pixels, right? So, oops, sorry, 8x8, and you want to use 72 dpi. Textures are always at 72 dpi 100% of the time. The only thing that changes is the dimensions of the pixel canvas. So at 72 dpi, currently the industry is using, I think the next one is 4096 times 2. I think it's 4096 times 2. Yeah, 8192. That's the current resolution for film. That's a lot of texture to process for rendering. And just now we're getting to the place, everything that's on the PlayStation 4, everything that's on the Xbox One, we're typically using 4096. So in other words, you would do 4096 by 4096. That would be your HD true 4K setting right here. Mobile cannot use this. It is not possible for mobile to use this right now. What runs really nice on mobile right now is 1024. It's the equivalent to like a PS2. Okay, now switch gears. Let's talk about 2D artists. What does a 2D artist need? So 2D artists need 1920 by 1080. That is the rectangle of your monitor. They haven't come down to what's known as the golden ratio. They haven't come down to the 2 squares is the perfect rectangle. They haven't come to that place yet. But this is good enough. This is you know, all televisions are typically made by 16 by 9. So the aspect ratio, okay, so I'm going to hit B for brush. That's typically what the first thing a person wants to know. How do I get started? Hit Control N or hit New, 19 by 20 by 1080. Hit OK. Hit B for brush, and this is going to be your color, the one that's laying on top. And we're going to start painting 1920 by 1080 at 72 dpi, dots per square inch. Okay, dots per square inch. This is known as a 16 by 9 aspect ratio. The old televisions ran off of 640 by 480, and this is known as a 4:3 aspect ratio. AR, aspect ratio. Okay, so we don't need this anymore. This is an obsolete tech. This is just old, just showing you the different math. So that means this is 16, this number from this distance, 16 by 9. That's what that aspect ratio means. That's the math on the length and the width of your application. 1920 by 1080 is default resolution for your canvas. If you want to increase the size and go double that, make sure that your computer can handle something like that. Essentially, the easiest thing that I like to do is I do File New if I don't want to do the math. You can do show you a real quick trick. Do something like this. Just right click on the header, undock it if it's docked. If you right click on the header and you want to go double that size, just do image size, and then do switch it over to pixels, and then just do 2048 right there. And then there's your other this is your 16:9 aspect ratio. So that's what you could put in for file new, or you can just use this canvas. That's double the size. It's a huge file, really massive file. You better have a lot of RAM and power in your machine in order to run a file like that. So just letting you know. Why don't we use inches? Because inches only have to do with print work. By the way, that was the conversion rate. So I went from pixels to inches at 72 dpi. I'm talking about a 50-inch resolution for print, a 50-inch poster, 50-inch by 28. That's a pretty big poster. So and then if I needed to increase that to 300, now look at the file size here. We're talking about 170 by 8533. That is a massive image. Okay, for those of you that still have no idea what I'm talking about, that's okay. I'm just kind of rambling and going into advanced stuff while I'm talking about basic stuff. This is all you need right here. 1920 by 1080 at 72 dpi. And that gives you a blank canvas. So let's go ahead and switch this. All right, blank canvas. What I would suggest before you start drawing anything, come over here and hit a new layer. So make sure you're in your layers palette and hit a layer and then start drawing. So, here's a really good clean example of being an idiot. So I just started painting on layer 1. Look, I'm putting stuff down, but it doesn't look like I'm working because my color is white. I'm using a white color right now. So if I deactivate this layer, look, I've actually got content on here. So it is working. It just wasn't using the right color. So start putting black down and it works. But now I've got black and white on the same canvas, on the same layer. So just pay attention to something like that. Always remember color layer first. So pick your layer, pick your color, start painting. Again, pick your layer, pick your color, start painting. If you already have your color selected, make sure you're on the right layer. I can't express that enough. Make sure you're on the right layer. One more again. Right layer. Get on the right layer. Okay? So I'm going to delete the layer and put a new layer down. So what will also help you, don't paint on white. Get in the habit very early on. If you go to your color palette, find the middle number between white and black. So currently, as you watch my numbers increase, we're going from black to black to white. Okay, if I stay on the left side of this wall, all of the numbers are going to be completely the same, red, green, and blue. So this is having to do with color theory right now. And as I increase, I start getting into white, and it peaks out at 255. Well, in simple math, 0 to 255 is actually 256 colors because 0 is actually considered a color. So you have to add that to that number, right? So if you take 255 plus 0, it actually means 256. I know the math sounds funky, but stay with me. We have 256 colors to choose from. Divide it by 2 and you land on 128. We call this 128 gray right here, okay? 128, 128, 128. RGB is how we talk in terms of colors. RGB. We don't really look at a hue saturation balance. Hue saturation and balance. We talk about red, green, and blue. Another way that we talk about is using what we call a hexadecimal number. CMYK has to do with printing media. And if we were going to print something, we would not work in, if you can see over here on this side, we do not work in RGB mode. If we're going to print something, we work in CMYK mode so we can print something. Lab colors has to deal with monitored calibration. We don't use that. So if you're wanting to pass a color off to a friend, the quickest thing, instead of saying red 128, green 30, blue 14. You can just say hexadecimal number, just name off 6 numbers in a row, and it'll set the RGB for you, no problem. Awesome color code. Okay, so when you're starting to paint for the first time, set this to 128 gray. Okay, so I set it to 128 gray. It didn't change the canvas. Make sure I'm on the background layer, right? Then I check my color, Shift F5, and it says fill. Contents, foreground color, blending mode, normal, opacity 100%. So when I do it, there it is. Now, how else can I do that aside from the Shift 5 hotkey? You can go to Edit, Fill, Shift F5, right there. So you press it, same window comes up, hit OK, fills the canvas for you. Now, how come you don't want to use white, and how come you don't want to paint on black? Because, believe it or not, this is a technique thing. This has nothing to do with whether you're inadequate or not, but this will give you your balance and allow you to light your content correctly by starting out with a middle tone rather than starting with an ultra bright tone or an ultra dark tone. Stay right in the middle, the crispy middle, and what we call sea level. All right. So if I start painting again, look, I put something down, but I'm using gray again. Okay. So I'm gonna undo that. Should be off. Okay. So hit D for the reset my colors, and now I can start painting. No problem. So let's just do that. Shift F5 equals edit fill. All right, that's a good hotkey for you to know right off the bat. Now, what if I want to move this text and I don't want it up here? What if I want to move it, down that way? Well, I'll hit V. That's this over here is your move tool, is the letter V. All right, and I can make sure I have the layer selected. I can move it from point A to point B, and then there's my layer. I can move it wherever I want to on the canvas. Okay, now if I try to move the background layer, see how it cannot use the move tool because the layer is locked. That's because there's a lock symbol on this layer. You might be working. You might click the layer. You might actually click one of these buttons up here. These are all different kinds of locks as well. So you've got to make sure that you're paying attention and you don't hit a button. So if you look at your layers, anytime you press one of those buttons, it automatically tells you there's a lock applied to it. So pay attention to that. If you have your layer selected, you have the color that's correct, nothing's happening, check and see if your layer's locked. Can you paint on a locked layer? So this layer is locked. If I hit B for brush, right, make sure my color's good. Yes, you can. But I can't actually, like if I change the color to this to red, let's go ahead and change the color. I'll get into these fill modes here in a minute. Color overlay. I can't change the layer. There, the green's fine. I can't change the layer. I can't put this squiggly line on top of this green layer. I can't do it because it's this black squiggle is baked into this background, and so I can't shift it around. So now, what if I did a black squiggle on a different layer? Right? And I can paint on top of that all day. Why? Because it's like one stack of paper on or one sheet of paper resting on another sheet of paper. That's pretty much how layers work in Photoshop. So let's go ahead and move my text over here. Okay, I'm going to delete this squiggly line mess, and I'm also going, now how did I delete it? Okay, select a layer, click and hold, and then drag it to the trash can that's down here in the bottom right hand corner. Now it goes away. Now what if I want to get rid of this? Well, why can't I just erase it? So if I flip my pen over, so I'm drawing it to the side, I flip my pen over, and I start erasing, how come it's painting white? How come it's not erasing? The reason is because it has to do with this background color over here. Right? Plus this is not a layer. It's not a transparent layer. Can I erase? Yes, I can. Actually, let me check and make sure that there's no. Yeah, it wasn't actually erasing, it was just painting. Okay. And I don't use that anyways. I don't flip my pen over. These are $80. So I tried not to do anything fantastical with this pen whatsoever because $80 is pretty precious to anybody, right? So I don't want to be a drummer and then fling my pen across the room. I dropped the pen that actually came with my tablet. I dropped it once and it totally died. So I had to get a replacement pen, $80. I treat this thing like gold. You get a really nice case that comes with it. Pretty dope. I just wish it came with the different tips. I'm really aggravated that all it came with was these crappy plastic ones. I don't like those tips. Okay, let's get back to painting. So I'm going to go ahead and I want to refill this with gray again. To basically start this layer over. So I have some choices. I can come over here. I can go try to find my 128 gray again. Okay, that's one way of doing it. But I can also add this color into my palette. So if I come over here, go to the very bottom, I can press this new button, and whatever's in my color palette, I can press it, and it'll say swatch whatever. I can name it. I think I actually named mine 128 gray, so it's already in my palette. It's right here. I've got it on just this one side. So yeah, selecting it. Let's see if I hover over it, it should name it. Maybe I have to right click on it. Rename swatch. Okay, so I guess I never named it, but I've been using these for so many years now. I know that's 128 gray. So I just check it anyways. There it is, 128 gray. So let's go ahead and use that. Shift F5 to fill. All right, and now I hit D to reset my brushes. Okay. By the way, if you hit X, it'll toggle between your foreground color and your background color. Right over here, hitting X. So if I have a new layer, I can do white, or I can do black. Okay. Is there a way to get them to fade between? Yeah, that's an advanced lesson that has to do with the brushes and the brush settings. You can actually toggle between different saturations of black and white. Also, you're noticing that I have a black and white layer on the same layer, so let's deal with layers a little bit more now. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control A. Now that's a new feature a new button that I'm teaching you here. Control A is essentially select all. Select all. Control A is select all. And you'll see that there's marching ants around the whole canvas. And what I can do by having these marching ants is when I see it, whatever layer I'm on, I can press the delete button, it'll clear the whole canvas out. It's not filling it with color. It's not putting data into it. It's just saying whatever was on that layer gets nixed. It's deleted. Now, we're going to use a little bit more selections in a moment. I still want to talk about layers, so I'm going to go ahead and paint some color on here. So there's color, and I'm going to make it. So I'm going to double click this. I'm going to double click the text, not the icon, not this little window. I'm going to double click the text. I'm going to call this black. Okay. I'm going to make a new layer down here, and I'm going to call this one white. All right. So I'm going to paint this layer with some white on it. So let's go ahead and paint this. Okay. Now you notice if I hit V on the keyboard, I can take this white and I can lay it over top of the black, right? If I want to switch them, it's just like taking two pieces of paper. Let's use a round one and a white one, rectangular one. It's like taking two pieces of paper and literally doing this. It's literally what we're doing. And simply how we do that is we just switch the layers like this, right? This is also known as layer management. Making sure our layers in the right order, front to back. That's what this is known as. This is the back or the bottom layer, and the black one is on the top layer. For those of you who are very familiar or learning familiarity with the hotkeys, you can also do this. You can control click the layer that you want. And if you watch my palette over here, I'm actually hovering over the white layer now, and I'm control clicking over it, and it'll actually select that layer for me. Simply by holding control and clicking the layer, as long as there's pixel data on it, it'll actually select the layer for you. I can pick the background layer. Or I actually selected none. Okay, so then what about this green one? So I'm just going to put down Shift F5. Shift F5. All right. So there you go. It selects the layers for me. So now what if I want to erase some stuff on the black layer? Let's just turn my pen over. Let's see if that works. So there we go. So now I'm erasing. All right. White layer, same thing. Control click it. And now I can erase. So how come it erases on these layers? How come it doesn't erase on the background layer? And the reason is because there's nothing underneath the background. The background is 100% locked right now. It's got italicized text on it. There's a big lock on it. So it's saying, hey, I'm the last thing on here. You can't actually do anything else underneath me. I'm it. What if I want to release the background? What if I don't want the background to be locked? All I got to do is double click. And it's basically saying, hey, what do I want to do with this layer? I'm actually converting the background to a layer. And I can name it. So I'm going to name it BG for background. And now if I try to erase, now it actually works. All right? And that's how that works, guys. So I'm going to undo that. Control Z for undo. So let's do this too. Let's talk about undos. Undos is more important than selections because people make mistakes all the time. Okay, so let's talk about undos. There's different types of undos. So I'm going to write this down. Undo. Okay, I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, if I hit Control Z, it will only undo the last action. So if I hit Control Z again, you would think that it would actually undo number 5, but watch. It doesn't do that. I don't know why. It's not how people think normally. You would think that the more you press that undo, 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 it would just iterate and go backwards. Undo is only a toggle in Photoshop. It's only a toggle in Photoshop. So how you do undo steps is you have to hold Control Alt Z. See that? I'm holding Control Alt Z. Z. Okay, so if I now see how I stepped backwards? Now if I hit Control Z, watch what happens. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So don't think that it's you. It's not you. And so here's another way to access these undo steps. Okay, you come over here to your layer tool. Your history tool. And these are all of the brushstrokes that I currently did. So that's basically telling me there's 25 different things that I've done since I've opened up this document. Why 25 is I don't think it actually, yeah, see it starts undoing. For every action that I take from here on out, it's just going to delete the very first action that I did. Because these are all the newest actions, these are all the oldest actions. So if I do this, which look, the move tool's gone, change name's gone. So I'm actually losing this data. So just pay attention to what you're doing. All right. Now let's say I want to go back to the brush strokes and I want to go back to new layer. So I can actually click on one of these one at a time. You know, and see which mistake that I don't want anymore. Okay. So technically I want that. Now what would happen if I went all the way back here? So as you can see, I can go back and forth in this mix, no problem. Now just be aware that if you go make a big jump like this and I do a brush stroke, watch what happens to this history palette. It deleted all those actions because I jumped back to that area in time. So that's just something you got to pay attention to, okay? So far we've covered color. How do you get your color? As you come over here, we talked about 128 gray, okay? Oh, look at that. That was a lucky hit. We're talking about 128 gray. That was really the first thing we talked about in regards to color. You can slide your color bar from right to left, okay? The more to the right you are, the more saturated the color. The more up you are, the brighter it is, the darker it is when you come to the bottom. Okay, brightness. I said balance before, but I know better. Hue, saturation, and brightness. Okay. And you can also adjust your color wheel by going this way as well. Right? So if I want to find yellow, I simply come over here. If I want green, etc., cyan, blue, purples in between magenta and blue, and blue. Then you have magenta and you have red. Okay, so that's the spectrum for you. So there's color. What else did we do? We went over layers. We talked about making new layers. We talked about locking and unlocking layers. We talked about unlocking the background. We talked about overlapping content by holding control down and switching. Switching layers by holding control, not switching the layers, but just switching back and forth between layers. And then also I can switch them manually by clicking and dragging. And now I can come over here and then look, the black's behind the white one. I can switch again. Black is now above or in the forefront of the white layer. We talked about the eraser tool. As long as there is a layer active, you can turn your Wacom pen over and use the eraser tool. You can also get to the eraser tool by pressing the letter E. E for erase. And so by using the regular part of the pen, not the eraser part of the pen, what I can do is I can use the eraser tool and I can actually erase manually doing that way. So there's another way to access the tool. We also talked about the undo levels. We went to deal with history. So history keeps track of your undos. Now what happens if your history palette is not over here? How do you access your history? Well, you go to Window and then History, and then it'll pop out for you. So that's how else you access it. If it's not here, I apologize, but at least I covered it. What else can we talk about? I would say the only other thing that you might want to take into consideration is the size of the paintbrush. So currently I'm using this thickness of the brush. So I have to hit. So right now I'm trying to paint. I can't paint, and the reason is because my eraser brush is active, not my paintbrush. So I have to hit B for brush, and then I can start painting. Now if I want a larger brush, there's brackets on the keyboard next to the letter P. And so let me see if I can get my active keyboard to show up. Hold on a second. Right here. These two brackets will actually change the size of the paintbrush. So let me go ahead and hit those bracket buttons for a minute. Let's see. Let me change the color of this real quick, and so this way you guys can actually see the brush growing and shrinking. Okay, so and there's my brush. So if I hit D and X, now I can paint. Larger brush. If I want the brush smaller, I can just hold it down and then I can paint. Okay, same thing, and I can hit X to switch the color. And so there's that. What else can I teach you in regards to the brush tool for right now? So we talked about the eraser, B for brush, E for erase, V for move. The move tool is important. So right now my background layer is locked. I did not paint all of this extra squiggle on a separate layer. I painted it on my cyan layer, right? So now I've got this awkward thing happening. So that's why I don't normally paint on my background. Typically what I do is I select my 128 gray, hit Shift F5, call it background, and then I lock that sucker because I don't need it. I don't want to paint on it. I want it left alone. If I want to make another background layer, I just simply hide it. You know, I can hit Control J, it won't be locked. Control J actually duplicates layers. And I can say, okay, well, I'm ready for my super background. It's going to be super amazing. And we'll just start with purple. Oh, I got to turn the layer on. I was like, why isn't it working? Shift F5, fill, right? And that's it for now. We'll move on to gradients and the gradient bucket here in a minute. Shalom.